hunting hill country requires a totally different skill set than hunting, low level ag / timber swamp. Hill country is just different because ridges and valleys and saddles and thermal drafts and swirling winds. If you have to hunt the wind, it's very difficult, and you have to know how the mature bucks that you're after, how they work the wind during their movements during daylight hours. They'll go down and move through thermal hubs like in the evenings. All the thermal drafts are going downward. So anytime you've got a ravine, they can go down in the bottom of the ravine, which all the drafts are coming down there, and all the swirling winds are going to come down through there in different directions as well. So any deer that came up the ridge up above that ravine, their scent is going to end up down in that thermal draft area. So bucks, and in the morning, it's just the opposite because thermal drafts are going upward. So it was really interesting how well Jared knew how to work that. I was very impressed because most of the guys did not, because most of them came from flat land hunting.
Yeah, we've got absolutely reamed on social media. I mean, who cares? But it's interesting to see what things fire people up and don't. We kind of think that, we hunt the Kiamichi Mountain Range in Arkansas and Oklahoma, and we see a lot of the dudes that hunt the big woods, or stuff maybe in Tennessee, or just mountain hunters in general. It seems like there's a lot more considerations that they have to take with thermals and winds and maybe lower deer densities and stuff, and you just see a lot of those folks go from mountain hunting to doing really, really well in ag places and different places all across the country. We kind of think that people that hunt mountains, at least from our perspective and our limited perspective, it seems like they just kind of get it a little more, like they're just a little bit more refined. Do you think that's true?
I totally agree with that. Yep, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, when I first started hunting southern Ohio quite a few years ago, when I started hunting out of state in the 90s, it was different. Yeah, it was different. I mean, I wasn't concerned about me getting winded because I was using sunlock at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
But the deer moved differently. The mature bucks definitely moved according to thermals and swirling winds and the undulations of the land. Basically, they moved according to the terrain features. They like to feed on flats. On the side of the ridge, there might be a flat area with some oaks on it. They like to feed on flat ground. They would transition down ridges, down sides of ridges. There'd be runways down sides of ridges. But anytime they were actually going to feed, they preferred to feed on some sort of flat terrain. So they'd be up on the top of the hills or on the flats or down in the bottoms. But it was just different to watch how the mature bucks would, and I didn't see a lot of mature bucks. I was on public land, obviously, but it was just interesting to see how the deer moved according to the winds and the thermals and the swirling winds. Because when you're hunting hill country, if you're on the side of a ridge, you could throw milkweed every 3 seconds and go in a different. I mean, I'm not a milkweed guy whatsoever. I did in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, but not since Setlock. But the milkweed's going to go different directions each time, and you'll see it drift down, and all of a sudden it'll turn and go right, and then you'll watch it 10 yards, and then it'll turn and go left. The wind's just moving around all the time, and the hillier the country, the more the wind swirls.
Well, it seems hard too, because those deer in those terrains, they seem, at least from my perspective, really nomadic. Like you see them bed in one area, and then the next day they might come from a completely different direction. It's not like in big ag, hey, that big block of timber, that's bedding, this is food. They come out of that every night, and you see them doing the same thing. It's like even when you think you're doing the right thing, it's like as soon as you think you're in the game, they're like, I got a curveball for you. I was actually bedding here today, and so now I'm going to get you.
Well, they bed according to the wind. That's something that hill country doesn't have. It doesn't have swamps. It doesn't have defined bedding areas like ag areas and swamp areas and big timber areas do. Like you were just talking about, you got deer come from A to B, pretty much regularly, unless it's during a rut and they're pursuing those in uncharted courses. But in hill country, it's depending on the way the wind's blowing, they may bed up on the crest of the hill. If the wind's blowing out of the west and there's a hill, they will bed on the east side of the crest of the hill. That way they got a visual down the hill once the foliage is down during the rut phases. So they can see stuff down the hill, and anything coming over from the other side of the hills, the wind's going to blow over the crest, and they're going to smell danger or a doe from the other side. So if the wind changes the next day, they're not going to bet in that spot because it's not advantageous for them to do so. So they change their bedding areas according to the wind and the thermals and the swirl.